My mom wore a white gown to my wedding and sabotaged my marriage. Now she's cut off after years of chaos, and I'm finally rebuilding my life with my wife. I'm 35 years old, and I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for almost 2 years now. We've been together for 8 years in total. Sarah is kind and warm, though more reserved. She isn't the loud, life-of-the-party type, but she's the kind of person who makes you feel like you're the only one in the room when she talks to you. I love her for that. But there's one big issue that's been gnawing at us since day one. My mother, Linda. She's, well, let's call her intense. I always knew my mom was the type to take charge. Growing up, she micromanaged every part of my life. What I wore, where I went, even who I was friends with. It wasn't all bad. She did it out of love, I think. But when Sarah came into my life, it was like Linda saw her as an interloper rather than someone I cared deeply about. Linda's first impression of Sarah was lukewarm at best. She greeted her politely but later told me she seems distant. Don't you think? Like she's not really one of us. Sarah had barely said a word before my mom had formed an opinion. Sarah is naturally reserved in new settings, so she didn't jump into the whirlwind of my family's boisterous gatherings. My mom took that as a personal insult. The first big clash happened during Thanksgiving, the year Sarah and I started dating. My family has a tradition of everyone pitching in to prepare the meal. Sarah, who hadn't grown up with big family gatherings, offered to set the table and do dishes, but didn't dive into cooking. My mom made a snide comment loud enough for Sarah to hear. Guess some people think they're too good for kitchen duty, she said. I saw Sarah flinch but stay silent, which made me feel awful. I didn't address it with my mom right away, a mistake I still regret. Over the years, Sarah tried to bridge the gap. She attended every family dinner, asked my mom about her hobbies, gardening and some crafting projects she never finishes, and even baked Linda's favorite cookies for her birthday one year. But nothing seemed to satisfy my mom. She'd nitpick, these cookies are too soft. Or why doesn't Sarah ever bring up her family? Doesn't she have stories to share? It was true that Sarah wasn't close to her family, but she hated talking about it. I respected that. But my mom saw it as another flaw. Things got even worse when Sarah and I moved in together. Linda would pop by unannounced, often armed with unsolicited advice or a laundry basket of my favorite old clothes she insisted I should keep. One day, Sarah and I were hosting a quiet dinner for a few of our friends when Linda showed up, not realizing we had company. She barged in, saw the table set for 6, and said, "Oh, I didn't realize you two were having people over. I guess I'll just have to come back another time, but don't let me interrupt your fun." Her tone dripped with sarcasm, and Sarah's face fell. The final straw for Sarah came when we got engaged. I thought it would be a happy moment for everyone, but Linda managed to sour it within hours. She pulled me aside after the announcement and asked, "Are you sure she's the one? You two don't seem like a good match. She doesn't put family first, you know." I was furious and told her to back off, but the damage was done. Sarah overheard and spent most of the night avoiding everyone. She later confessed to me that she almost called off the engagement because she didn't know if she could handle my mom for the rest of her life. I managed to convince Sarah to stay, promising to set boundaries with my mom. And I did try. I told Linda she needed to call before visiting, stop with the passive-aggressive comments, and let Sarah have some breathing room. For a while, things seemed to improve. Linda backed off just enough to make me think the worst was behind us. But as the wedding approached, things took another nosedive. Linda insisted on being involved in every detail, from the flower arrangements to the guest list. She even tried to veto Sarah's choice of a sleeveless wedding dress, saying it was inappropriate for a family event. Sarah stood her ground, and I backed her up, but it only fueled Linda's resentment. On our wedding day, Linda barely spoke to Sarah. In most of the photos, she's standing stiffly off to the side, scowling. I thought marriage might ease the tension, but it only made things worse. Linda started dropping by unannounced again, often with helpful advice about how Sarah should run our household. One time, she actually reorganized our kitchen while Sarah was out, claiming it would make things easier for everyone. Sarah came home and burst into tears when she saw it. I had to confront my mom yet again, which led to her accusing me of choosing Sarah over family. Then there was the incident with the dog. Sarah and I adopted a rescue pup named Max, a goofy Labrador mix who quickly became the center of our little family. Linda, however, hated dogs. She made that clear every time she visited, complaining about the fur, the smell, and the fact that Max liked to jump up to greet people. One day, while Sarah and I were out running errands, Linda let herself in with the spare key I hadn't gotten around to reclaiming. When we got back, Max was gone, Linda claimed he had run off when she opened the door, but I later found out she had taken him to a shelter, saying we weren't responsible enough to care for a dog. I was livid and wanted to get Max back immediately. Sarah, meanwhile, was devastated and barely spoke to Linda after that. Even now, almost 2 years into our marriage, the tension hasn't eased. Forcing NBC. I feel stuck between my wife and my mom, both of whom I love but can't seem to reconcile. Sarah has been patient, more than I deserve, but I can see the toll it's taking on her. And my mom, well, she's not changing anytime soon. I've tried everything I can think of to smooth things over, but nothing seems to work. At this point, I'm wondering if it's even possible to make peace between them, or if I need to take a harder stand with my mom no matter the consequences. Things came to a head at our wedding. Sarah and I had been planning our wedding for months. We wanted something simple but meaningful, a small outdoor ceremony followed by a cozy reception with family and friends. Sarah spent weeks picking out a dress that she loved, a sleek and elegant satin gown with subtle lace details. She looked absolutely stunning in it, but apparently Linda had other opinions. The day of the wedding started off fine, or so I thought. Sarah's was in the bridal suite, getting ready with her sister Jenna and her best friend Rachel, while I was in a separate room with my best man Kevin and my younger brother Ethan. Everyone seemed excited, and I felt hopeful that, for once, things might go smoothly. Then Linda arrived. I should have known something was off the moment I saw her. She walked into the venue in a floor-length white designer gown, complete with intricate beading and a train. It was a dress that could have easily been mistaken for a bridal gown. My jaw dropped. I managed to pull her aside before she reached the main room and whispered, "Mom, what are you doing? You can't wear that. It's Sarah's day." Linda gave me an innocent look and said, "Oh, don't be silly. This isn't a wedding dress. It's just formal wear. Besides, it's not like Sarah's dress is the traditional poofy kind. She doesn't even look like a bride. So what's the harm?" I was speechless. Before I could argue further, she swept past me and began mingling with guests. When Sarah saw Linda's dress, her face fell. Jenna and Rachel were fuming, but Sarah, ever the peacemaker, just said, "Let's focus on the ceremony." I could see how hurt she was, though, and it made me furious. I knew Linda's choice wasn't an accident. It was a power move, plain and simple. The ceremony itself went off without a hitch, largely because Linda couldn't say much while we exchanged vows. Sarah and I poured our hearts out, and for a brief moment, I felt like nothing could ruin the day. But then came the reception. It started with Linda's toast. She stood up, champagne flute in hand, and began talking about the importance of family. At first, it seemed harmless. Generic advice about how marriage is a partnership and how we should always communicate. But then she veered off course. Marriage isn't just about love, Linda said, her voice dripping with condescension. It's about understanding your place in the family. A good spouse knows how to support their partner, but they also know how to respect their in-laws. After all, family is forever. Marriage is, well, they don't always last. She glanced at Sarah as she said this, and I could feel the room tense up. Sarah looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Jenna shot me a look that said, "Are you going to do something about this?" I was furious, but I didn't want to cause a scene in front of all our guests. Instead, I pulled Linda aside afterward and told her she'd crossed the line. She brushed me off, saying, "Oh, I was just being honest. If Sarah can't handle a little truth, maybe she's not ready for marriage." After the reception, things only got worse. Linda started excluding Sarah from family events and group chats. Every Sunday, my family has dinner together, and Sarah always came with me, until Linda stopped inviting her. When I asked why, she said, "Well, Sarah never seems comfortable around us, so I thought I'd spare her the awkwardness." It was a lie, of course. Sarah had always tried to make an effort, even when Linda made her feel unwelcome. Then there was the family group chat. My mom created a separate one that didn't include Sarah, and I only found out because my brother Ethan accidentally mentioned something about it. When I confronted Linda, she said, "Oh, it's just easier this way. Sarah doesn't really contribute to the conversations, so I didn't think she'd miss it." The exclusion didn't stop there. Said Christmas. Linda gave everyone personalized gifts, framed family photos, custom sweaters, even handmade ornaments. Sarah's gift? A generic candle with the price tag still attached. It was humiliating, and I could see the pain in Sarah's eyes. She tried to brush it off, saying it's just a candle. But I knew it wasn't about the gift itself. It was about the message behind it. You don't belong. My dad, Rick, tried to stay out of it, but even he couldn't ignore the tension. At one point, he pulled me aside and said, "You know how your mom gets. She just wants what's best for you." And I snapped back. How is sabotaging my marriage what's best for me? He didn't have an answer. Sarah's friends were livid on her behalf. Rachel, who never minced words, told me outright, your mom is toxic. If you don't stand up for Sarah, you're letting her ruin your marriage. Jenna was more diplomatic, but just as firm. You need to set boundaries, Liam. This isn't fair to Sarah. I knew they were right, but it was easier said than done. Every time I tried to talk to Linda, she turned it into a guilt trip. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. By siding with someone who doesn't even respect me. It was exhausting, and I started dreading every interaction with her. One of the most shocking moments came a few months after the wedding. Sarah and I were hosting a small dinner party for some close friends, including Ethan and his girlfriend, Becca. Everything was going well until Linda showed up uninvited. She claimed she just happened to be in the neighborhood, but it was clear she'd heard about the dinner and felt left out. Linda spent the evening making passive-aggressive comments, like, "Oh, I see you finally decided to use the wedding china I gave you. Took long enough." At one point, she cornered Becca and said, it's important to really get to know someone's family before you get serious. Otherwise, you might end up feeling like an outsider. Becca looked uncomfortable, and Ethan quickly ushered her away. After everyone left, Sarah broke down. "I can't do this anymore," he said through tears. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine when your mom goes out of her way to make me feel unwanted." It was a wake-up call for me. I realized that if I didn't take a stand, I was going to lose the woman I loved. I finally confronted Linda in no uncertain terms. I told her she needed to apologize to Sarah and start treating her with respect, or I'd have to distance myself from her. Linda was furious. She accused me of being ungrateful and letting Sarah control me. The tension only deepened after Christmas, when Linda decided to exclude Sarah from the family dinner altogether. She sent me a text. "John, we're having Christmas dinner at our house, but I think it's best if Sarah doesn't come. She makes everyone uncomfortable, and I want the day to be peaceful." That was it for me. "If Sarah's not welcome, then neither am I," replied. The fallout was immediate. Linda painted herself as the victim, spreading lies about Sarah to other family members, and even contacting Sarah's employer with false accusations. Sarah and I eventually had to file a restraining order against her, a painful but necessary step to protect our peace. Cutting contact with Linda was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also the right one. Over time, Sarah and I rebuilt our lives, creating new traditions and surrounding ourselves with people who truly cared about us. While the shadow of Linda's actions still lingers, we've found a sense of peace and happiness that I never thought possible. And for that, I am endlessly grateful.